Hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of a 2-part introduction to the fix, where we're talking through 10 different ways you can become a better writer. Now, if you saw part 1, if you haven't seen part 1, I would recommend going back and watching it. Glenn spoke at length, talking us through 5 different kind of tips and tricks he's got, most of which involved not doing any writing. However, I think I'm going to approach the same kind of ideas, but in a slightly different way. And I think there'll be a common thread through everything that we do in these 2 videos. So my first tip, if you are struggling to make your piece of writing work, it's to imagine you're going on holiday and you have to give your piece of work to another writer to write for you. And you have to write them a brief, a 1-page brief, a 2-page brief. You have to write down what it is you're trying to do so that somebody else could execute it for you. Now, that is a slightly alien way of going about writing. And it's also slightly strange because in general, we don't hand our projects over to other people. But what it forces you to do is cogently explain in a non-sales letter fashion. So not in copy, not in writing that will ever be read by your customer, but just in simple language to another writer. You have to lay out what your idea is, how you expect it to work, why you think it's a good idea, what you want the vibe to be, however you want to do it. You can write the brief however you want, but taking that step back and forcing yourself to actually write those things down, well, it will make you see whether or not you actually have an idea or anything to say. Because when people are starting out as writers, whether they're writing short copy or long copy, usually if you're the experienced writer and you come along and try and help them, you end up saying, what's your idea then? Or what are you really trying to say here? Let's just put the copy to one side for a second. Just tell me what this is so that we can figure it out together. So lots of my tips are ways of kind of figuring that out without needing somebody else to come along and point that out to you. And writing a brief, taking a step back and writing out your big idea in 50 words, or the goal, or who your target customer is. If you can't answer any of those questions in that artificial brief, well, then you haven't figured out what it is you're trying to say or how you're going to say it or what your idea is yet. So how on earth are you going to write it if you couldn't brief somebody else on it? That would be my...
It's funny, like a lot of my thoughts at the moment, I've been working on a novel in my spare time. So a lot of my thinking about writing at the moment is in that framework, as well as all the copy that I write. But as soon as you say that, I first thought you'd gone slightly insane as people go on holiday. But when I suddenly realized what you were really saying is that I've written the word down, synopsis. I've wrote 90,000 words of a novel, but then you have to write a synopsis and you have to write a little elevator pitch for 50 words or so, explaining what's in that novel. And to do that, I was ready to punch the wall, because you're trying to explain it. You've got it all in your head. You know what the story is about. And don't get me wrong, you might know what the piece of copy you're working on is about, and you might have that idea. It might not be that you've not got the idea, but you don't know quite how to express it in very simple terms. You can't do the old Kurt Vonnegut kind of explaining it in a line to a 14-year-old child kind of thing. So it made me realize at the same time, by having to write that synopsis, which is like a page of copy to describe, so basically 400 words to describe a 90,000 word piece of copy, and then getting that down to 50 words to like the back of a book blurb kind of thing, it makes you think, what is this really about? What is the idea? Now, if you've got the idea, then yeah, cool, you can kind of figure it out, but it gets you there. But yeah, if you can't then do it still, you've probably not got the idea. And as we looked at in the first video, figuring out that idea, planning out what you're going to talk about first is key to doing this. So before I ask you your second tip, Nick, would you do that before writing, or you framed it actually as if you're struggling to kind of figure out where you're going?
Yeah, so I would do, maybe not that formally, but I always write down what my idea is longhand to myself in case I forget it later. Because I tend to come up with the idea that I'm working on before I have the time or the space to write it. So for instance, I am about to go on holiday, which is probably why I started that tip like that. But I know that at the start of October, I have a couple of weeks where I need to write a ton of different ideas. Well, I'm working out what those ideas are now, and I'll be doing so while I'm on holiday as well, because it's a good time to take a step back. So I'm going to write down what my idea is, what my hook is, maybe even what the first line or the little story I'm going to use. I'm going to write all of that stuff down, because yeah, if you can't get yourself organized mentally, then maybe you can internalize it, but more often than not, when you're working with inexperienced writers, because they haven't figured that out yet. So I do it for practical reasons, but I would encourage junior writers to do it for non-practical and really critical reasons, because more often than not, you'll find you can actually, well, one of two things will happen. One, your pitch will become your promotion, because the change of format will force you to be more direct, and then, oh, I'm starting to get this now. Or far more likely, in my experience, you won't be able to do it. You won't be able to summarize your idea, your hook, or however you want to express it, your target audience, your goal, whatever it might be. You won't be able to do that. And that's alerting you to the fact that I'm not ready to write yet. I need to think this through. Once I've thought it through, then I'll start writing. And a lot of what we've talked about so far kind of approaches that idea anyway. That's just one way in.
Hindsight, hindsight is a very powerful thing. We can turn this to the hindsight newsletter, but I have always been a writer who tries to keep it all in their mind, and I've never made a lot of notes of ideas. I just have the ideas in my head. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or just more mature, but I've started making it. My wall here is covered in post-its where I've just written down the ideas, and getting that stuff out and getting those getting it written out there is, I would say, it's helping me now, and I wish I had done that sooner. So anyway, that's tip number one, to make sure you know what the idea is by trying to express it in a simpler form. It's a good advice. What's number two?
So this is actually another a lot of mine are sort of shortcuts that they're shortcuts, they're writing processes you can use. So if you're struggling, again, start by saying this: it began like this, ... and then tell your story. So force yourself to tell it like a story around a campfire. It was a dark and cold night, and Glenn Fisher was buying a piece of art, or whatever it might be. Force yourself to storify it, because the best way of melting people's objections, earning the right to talk about yourself, your product, whatever it is, tell them a story. Now, it may or may not end up in your final piece of work. Often it will. Often it's the quickest way to fix a piece of writing. And I think that will come back again and again and again as we look at people's work. But force yourself to do it. And even if you don't use it, you will, by writing it like that, you'll give yourself a viable testing option. If that doesn't make sense, you will talk about testing in a different show. But force yourself to tell a story for at least one version, because it's the least direct, most indirect way of talking and getting people's attention, but it's often the best. And the best copywriters always tell a story. What is it you're looking for?
I'm looking for a book. This is I'm surrounded by novels. This is off the cuff, but you just made me think. Both tip number one and tip number two, these little ideas, these exercises, if you like. You think, oh, I can't be bothered to do that kind of stuff. This book, The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, it's all about writing novels and stuff like that, but it's the same for any story, and that's all about taking characters, putting them in little situations, doing these exercises, and you kind of I really think, yeah, whatever, I'm not doing that stuff, but doing that stuff, as Nick's explained here, it is a game changer. It does make you think, it challenges you, and often in copy, the biggest thing you need, especially if you like working alone, is something to challenge you. So those exercises give you that kind of challenge. So it's a very good piece of advice. Number three on the exercises. This one won't be an exercise now.
It is. We're riffing on the same thing. Do you know what? The thing that you mentioned in part one, you did a creative writing degree, as did I. And one of the modules that we did was on poetry. Now, I'm not a poet, but I really enjoyed this module more so than I enjoyed any of the other poetry stuff. We did a module on found poetry, right? So found poetry, if you're unfamiliar, is giving yourself or finding the language you're going to use. So you may all, a class of 50, everybody contributes one word, and then you have to use all 50 of those words in your poem, for instance, or, it might be a location. However it is you generate the language, you can be creative around that. And there was lots of rules, it was rules-based writing. So for instance, the submissions all had to be 79 words, say, that was and if it was 80 or 78, you failed. You had to be 79. And the guy behind it, I forget his name now, said, I know it's arbitrary, but it's the rule. The rule forces you to think creatively about the task. Some people hated it. I really liked it. It's the same thing is true of all forms of writing. Set yourself a little challenge, a little exercise. So my third suggestion is something I'm really big on, which is take an existing promotion or blog post or whatever and write your version of it. So write your story into it. If they have 3 lines of story and then 1 line of claim, you have 3 lines of story and 1 line. You use it like a scaffold. You could call it an homage. I would call it a scaffold because it's actually how my wife's a primary school teacher. It's how you teach children to write. You give them the scaffold around which to pour their creativity and their ideas. And there's a lot to be said for that. Now, again, it might not get you to your final draft, but it will get you from 0 to 1. It will get you onto the page, and it will it might just unlock something creatively. So when I was the publisher of a business, I would often ask junior copywriters to find 3 or 5, 3, 4, 5 promotions and write their own version of each, and then we'd have a look at what's come out of that that's good. Maybe it's a line here, a line there. Well, that headline's nice, the way that structure really works for this idea. But it got lots of ideas out onto the page, and then we would go back and we would mash them together. And almost certainly, in the end, the finished product would look nothing like the originals. So you didn't end up publishing a pastiche of somebody else's work. In fact, I've had writers say to me, oh, this promotion really worked. That was all based on your promotion of such and such. And I was like, I had no idea. And I wrote it. So I didn't get any trace of the original promotion, but it got him into that idea. So that's my third.
Talking about rules, you said 3 or 5. Your gut instinct there was to go to 3 or 5. And then you said you brought 4 in, but that was wrong.
Yeah,
3 or 5.
Yeah.
Because you have 3 bullet points, 5 bullet points, 7 bullet points. You never have 4 even numbers.
Or 2. You can never have 2. Yeah, you can have 1, 3 or 7, really.
That's a free copywriting tip. So number 4.
So kind of similar to my first one, but it's like go and tell somebody your idea. Just go and talk it out to them. Because if you can't write it down and you can't say it, just literally, don't have to be another copywriter. Just go and say to your partner, your best friend, your mom, your dad, whoever, I'm working on something. It's the story of how Britain is going to be changed by a new technology called Bitcoin. And the reason I'm telling this story now is because X and Y and Z. Just force yourself to tell it. Now, there's 2 benefits of this. There's 7 benefits. No, there's 2 benefits of this. 1, if you can't verbally express it, how on earth are you ever going to write it? And 2, you get to gauge their interest. Everything brilliant I've ever written, I've been able to tell my wife about, who is not interested in my career on that level, the subjects I write about. But everything good has always piqued her interest, and it's always become a conversation, and it helped me know that, I'm onto something. And if sometimes she would say, I don't really understand what it is you're even saying. And I'd think, right then. Well, if I can't explain it to you, then I've got a real problem explaining it in writing to a perfect stranger. So go and talk your idea out to someone is my 4th.
There's a 3rd benefit to that it makes you a more interesting person, and it gives you the chance to, when you go, so I speak to people now, and it particularly helped. This bit of a kind of side tangent, but like when it comes to like getting copywriting gigs, because of all of the research and all of the things that I've learned over the years about the most niche, weird things in the world, when someone goes, oh well, we're looking for this, it's to do with this, most people just go, yeah, I've never heard of that. But if you do the research, if you get used to explaining things to people, then when someone comes to you and says, oh, do you know this? You do know it. It goes back to that reading widely, but it also in explaining it to people. And I would, yes, 9 times out of 10, you're going to probably speak to a fellow copywriter or a marketer. I would try, if you can, flip that around. And as Nick says, talk to your partner, talk to your best friend, talk to whoever you can who's not got any baggage with it. Because if it's hard, but if they don't care about the story, chances are no one else is going to kind of care about it. You're not writing to copyright. This will be a thing that will come back, I'm sure, but you're not writing copy to a copywriter or a marketer or even the business owner. Definitely not the business owner. In fact, you are writing copy to an interested party who doesn't even know that they're interested in this yet, and you've got to excite them. So that's why you need to speak to, like I always say, show Ruth. Ruth's my partner, and although I did do a presentation once and there was someone called Ruth in the audience, and that kind of went really weird and wrong very quickly, but just show someone who's not interested and practice doing that, as Nick says, because it will help. So that's number 4.
That's number 4.
Number 5.
So 5 is a little bit different. It actually comes back to your first point. Now, if everybody at home remembers, that was read as widely as possible. I think it was read. Now, something I would add to that is just finding it on my desk. So I keep a book. I keep more than one book, but this is a very special book. So that is a book that is full of everything interesting I've ever read that had nothing to do with what I was working on. There's a name for it, or what I call it in my head is the Victorians used to have something called a commonplace book. And it was just like, it's like a book, a notebook that you would just write little quotes, little ideas, anything that was interesting down in. And you write it all down at random. You hear an interesting fact on the telly, or you read a book, or there's just a great phrase. It could be anything. You just write it down. And then
burn it.
Sorry, then you burn it, and then you try and remember it, and it goes around in a circle. No, so what that does is a few things. One, it means you kind of have a well of interesting ideas ready for you, because it's really hard to come up with an interesting idea on demand. I need an interesting story about the energy markets. By definition, you're just going to struggle to do it because you're kind of under pressure. But if you've got this kind of well of ideas, the other thing is you'll be reading different material. So you'll be reading a book about X, and you'll be watching a program about this, and it could be a million different things. And by making little notes on all those different things and jumbling them all up, you might just make connections between different ideas. Now, I will write in this, and then I don't look at it every day. I just jot something down. Every now and again, I flick back through. I'll read something out. Okay, this is at random. Phone freaks are people that hacked the dial tone frequencies using a mouth organ. Phone freaks were people that would play this little bit of music down a phone, and it would allow them to call anywhere in the world. That's cool, right? I later found out that's how Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak met. They were both phone freaks. I don't know how in fact, I can remember the story, but I'm not going to tell it. But now that's of no use to me at this point in time. But it's there, so I don't forget it. Because one day I might just want to tell a story.
Sorry.
I mean, it's quite cool, but I might just find that story and pull it off the shelf and say, I need a story about Steve Jobs, or something about hacking, or it could be anything. And I don't worry about it, but I want that well of ideas. So that's just a way. It's probably a reading-based exercise, is probably the best way to put it. Read widely, but if you find something interesting, whether it's a sentence that just gives you the chills or a great little fact, reading magazines is a great way of doing this, because you're getting a lot of different source material from all over the place. Just jot it down, and then don't worry about it. And every now and again, come back to it, and you'll find something there. I don't know what, and it might not be an idea that you can use promotionally, but it might just send you down a little alleyway. It might just help you organize it's sort of like informal research, I suppose you could call it.
It reminds me of there's a lot of cliches and a lot of kind of hackneyed phrases, advice, what have you, in copywriting that we've heard a million times over. I'm sure you listening to this and watching this have come across them as well. But one thing that people always say is you've got to be curious as a copywriter. And chances are you sat there watching a video on YouTube or through an email newsletter, you're probably curious, because not many people do that. You've already like evidenced yourself as being someone who's interested in this stuff. But it really is true. You've got to always be looking out. And what I say about the curiosity thing is you are always on the job kind of thing. There is always, wherever you are, you just want to be going, well, why is that? Like, what's going on there? And then if you can be disciplined, like as Nick's doing there, like getting those notes down in a book, it's going to help you. It's going to save you a lot of space, because keeping too many books around your house, you just have to keep buying bigger and bigger houses, and it's impractical. But like just making a little note of those things when you're always turned on, even like on your phone, if you want to get like modern, if I see something, I'll just go on the notes app and just put it in there. Like, but yeah, always be curious and always be like looking out, because you don't know where your next idea is coming from. You really don't. So read widely, but make notes and catch that in. I agree with that. So that's 5, isn't it?
Yeah, that's 10. And I suppose we should try to summarize things. I'll let you have a go in a second, but my summary of the things, the common thread, I think, is how little writing is involved in being a writer and how much thinking is involved. So I know mine were often rules-based writing, but that's always a way of approaching the thinking process. And I think that's one of the secrets to being a good writer, which is don't write too much, think a lot. And if you can do all those things and do them well, when you come to write, it will be a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And like to kind of back end that, it's the idea I find that people don't give themselves, credit isn't the right word, but like they don't think they deserve that time. They don't, they feel like a fraudulent if they're just thinking, if they're just reading, if they're just doing this stuff. And especially if you are working for someone and your kind of your time is visible, like no one knows what I do during the day. I mean, I don't know what I do during the day most of the time, but like I can break it up as I like. I'm telling you, I'm doing a lot of reading and I'm not doing a lot of writing, but I'll get the same amount of writing out at the end of the day as most people will. So it's just about trying to, as early as you can, trying to show people, including yourself, that doing that thinking, doing that writing, that is the job. Like the actual, doing that writing, I was contradicting myself, doing the thinking, doing the research, just figuring out how to write is the job. The actual writing itself and then the editing is a massive part as well, but like you don't get to that without that first bit. You can't, there's no way of cheating it. You can for a little while, but eventually you'll run out of those kind of pure, unearthed ideas that you just kind of spit out from nowhere when you're perhaps a younger writer or whatever, and you kind of, your ideas just go on the page. When you're looking for it, you need to do it. So I would just amend that or add on that, yeah, you've got to kind of think and do that side of things. But I know from a practical perspective, the world is against you doing that. Like they just want you to write as fast as quick as possible, get it out there, get on the page. But you've got to try and change that mindset. And if you go into your copywriting with that in your mind, thinking, oh yeah, no, like Nick and Glenn said, like it's worth doing this stuff, you'll get a bit more zen about it. It's taken me like 20 years to figure that out and kind of get to that place. But so start doing that early.
So this, of course, is a project that's all about writing, but that's sort of what you can expect in the fix. I think we're going to take pieces of copy, we're going to try and take them apart and improve them, but we are also going to use that as a vehicle, as a platform for trying to explore how to think about copywriting in a way that makes your copy stronger. So those are the two things. We don't want everything to be abstract. as these two shows have been to a certain extent, because we're just kind of trying to introduce ourselves. We want things to be very practical, but as a jumping off point. So the next show you're going to see from us is the first The Fix real show. And by that, I mean, we're going to look at some copy that has been submitted by various different writers. If you want to have your copy featured in the show, write to us at feedback@longcopymasterclass.com. If you don't want to send something in yet, but you do want to see how it's all going to work and how we're going to talk about the copy and how we're going to try and improve it, then how about this? Wait, watch the first real video, the first The Fix, where we look at people's copy, see how we go about things, and then submit some copy. But the email that you'll need is feedback@longcopymasterclass.com. That's all for today. Glenn, let's get ourselves in the mindset to fix some people's copy up, and we will see everybody else down the road. Goodbye.